Thank you very much. So, thanks for coming again. So, today is a little bit more sort of, it's kind of like a personal view on doing large-scale clinical trials. I started off doing large-scale trials about 25 years ago. I just sort of looked around and I said, look, who's doing good research? And it was the cardiologists. In cardiology, we had safe, effective treatments. And I thought, well, why do we have such good treatments for heart disease? And it's because I concluded it's because they do big trials. They do very large randomized controlled trials and they get very clear-cut answers. And so the how to do big trials became something very important to me. Now, a lot of people think trials go like something like this. You start off with an investigator, usually a man, very senior, austere investigator, and they have a great idea. They want to build a trial, and so they have a protocol, which is a plan of how to do it. And then everybody realizes that you need a sample size, you need to know how many bricks you need to do this big thing, and so they do their sample size estimate. And out of that, this beautiful structure of knowledge emerges. But it's not like that at all. Between the protocol and the result, oh, that slide didn't want to show yesterday either. Something about that slide. And the result, oh, this slide doesn't want to show either. Okay, but it doesn't matter. Between the protocol and the result are two slides you can't see, and this. This is the recruitment. Isn't that mysterious? I wonder why those two slides refuse to be shown. I'm glad this one, you can see this one because this is what I wanted to show you. This is the hard bit of a clinical trial. Thinking of the protocol is easy, analyzing the results is easy, and the bit in the middle is the hard bit. Yeah? So so the first, like yesterday I was talking about this big randomized trial in head injury, like saying, okay, I think we should randomize 13,000 patients to get tranexamic acid or placebo to see if it stops bleeding. It's very easy to do that. I think anybody can do that. And then when you've got the data set, you divide it by the treatment and you work out the proportion of patients who died in this group and the proportion of patients died in that group. That's very easy too. The difficult bit of randomized controlled trials is the recruitment. And that's what you have to get good at if you want to do them. And this process is the doing of science. And the doing of science is science, as far as I can tell. When somebody's in a laboratory doing experiments with genes or gene editing or something, we call them a scientist. But when we do experiments with people, I don't know, they call them managers or something, people who do this, but this bit is the hard bit of clinical trials. And I think it's something, you can't see it in the textbooks. They don't write textbooks about how to do randomized trials. They tell you about how to do a protocol and how to analyze the results, how to interpret other people's randomized trials, but they don't tell you actually how to do randomized trials. And I think it's a skill that's passed. It's more like a skill. It's more like a craft. And craft, you learn from watching somebody else who's done it. So, this is like a stonemason, crafting stone into beautiful shapes. you can't tell somebody how to do that. You know, you can't really, you have to learn from somebody, you have to watch somebody else do it. And so we did that. We started watching other people and learn from experience, learn by doing, and it's all about process. It's all about the doing and not the outcome. That's one of the things that I've learned. So the first big randomized trial that we did, I was very interested in head injury. And head injury, you know, huge problem worldwide. And about 20 years ago, like half of the world's doctors would give this patient steroids. And half the world's doctors would not give steroids. And the world was divided. Neurosurgeons thought steroids were either life-saving or lethal. And one group was right and one group was wrong. And so we had to find out who was right and who was wrong. And so I thought, well, okay, it's an obvious solution, so let's do a randomized trial. Let's do a big randomized trial. Let's randomize 20,000 patients to get 10,000 get steroids, 10,000 don't, and see who does the best. And I got a grant from the Medical Research Council to do this. I applied. I'd never done a big trial before, but I got a grant from the Medical Research Council to do a big randomized controlled trial called the CRASH of steroids in head injury. And this slide, it's about burnout. I don't know why it's doing that. Let's have a look. Okay, it maybe doesn't like this, but you can tell this is a very sickly slide. Oh, I don't know if it is about that. Do you think so? I don't think so. I think it's probably something about the colours or something. But you can see that this is the recruitment curve, and this is the burnout point, right? So I got completely exhausted trying to randomize 20,000 patients with head injuries, right? I'd never done it before, and I really worked hard at it, trying to persuade people to randomize patients rather than treat this way or that way. And it was a bit tough because I was a pediatrician. I was training in pediatrics, and I was working with neurosurgeons. And neurosurgeons, I don't know if they're the same in this country, but they're very sure that they're right. They're convinced that they're right always. And so the idea of getting them to randomize was very difficult. So anyway, I tried to get recruitment off the ground. And then I got completely exhausted. And I had a friend who's another pediatrician, and she said to me, she said, "Ian, you know, you're a bit depressed, you know." And I said, "What? Do you think so?" She says, "Yes, I think so. Yeah, I've never seen you so exhausted and miserable." And I said, "Oh dear, that's not very good." So on the way home that day, I cycled home and I stopped at the chemist, and I went into the chemist and I wrote myself a prescription for Prozac. And you could do that then. You can't do it anymore. But I prescribed myself Prozac and then went on a holiday, a yoga holiday. Right? So I burnt out, and it was marvelous being burnt out because you start to look after yourself. And I went on a holiday, and this is a yoga center in the south of Greece. And this is where you practice your yoga in the morning, and then this is a little taverna. I mean, that's like a sort of a pub or izakaya or something. And so you do your yoga there in the morning, and then you'd go down to the taverna and have your breakfast. And I was sitting here, and maybe I was still looking miserable. And this guy there, I met this guy. He was there on the yoga course as well, and he said, "You're looking a bit, you're looking a bit worried. What are you thinking about?" And I was said to him, oh gosh, I've just been given all of this money by the Medical Research Council to randomize 20,000 patients in a head injury trial. And I don't think I can do it, It's exhausting, I'm tired, I don't think I can do it. And he said, well, tell me about it. And I started saying, well, we have to randomize this and that. And he said, oh, I can help you with that. He said, I can help you. I'm a professor of marketing. And all you've got is a marketing problem. And I said, really, you can help me? You can help me do the crash trial? He said, yeah, sure, I can help you do the crash trial. In fact, and he did. In fact, I went back to London after this, and we got a small grant for him to help us work on the crash trial. And he was a professor of marketing, and he said, well, look, it's a marketing problem, like any other problem. It's very similar to, so when you're marketing a product, you have to build brand values, you have to plan the product and the marketing, you have to make the sale, and you have to maintain engagement. This is the same if you're selling Coca-Cola, or, I don't know, Mitsubishi televisions, or whatever you're selling. The principles are more or less the same. And he said, well, look, what you're doing is a selling problem. You have to sell your randomized trial to the world if you want them to do it. So we used this approach to marketing the randomized trial. We said, right, first of all, we've got to develop a brand. We've got to have something that we've got to have brand values. Then we've got to gain legitimacy, and then we've got to show that this thing is worthwhile. So let's do that. So it should be very easy for academics to do this, to build brand values, because we've got such a wonderful thing to sell. We're selling not the building of knowledge for the public good. So, we designed logos, and we've got our brand values are very good values. Scientific rigor, patient benefit, collaboration. And we started realizing that these are actually easy things to sell. When you're selling Coca-Cola, it's very difficult because it's just sugary water. But actually, and that's hard, you have to be really clever to know how to sell that, but actually scientific rigor, patient benefit, and collaboration, those should be easy things to sell. And we got good collaborators, World Health Organization, Lancet. We said we're going to publish in the Lancet, London School of Hygiene logo, but it's somehow back to front. I don't know what's happening there, but gaining legitimacy and prestige. Now, we made some mistakes here because there's two ways you can gain legitimacy. There are no doubt there are leaders out there in the world, right? There are people who are considered leaders in the field. But they come in two types. There's Stalins and Gandhis, right? They were both leaders, but they were different kinds of leaders. Stalin was a rather authoritarian leader. He killed millions of people as well. But Gandhi wasn't. Gandhi was a different kind of leader, a sort of leader who leads from the back. In neurosurgery, we made a bit of a mistake. Initially, we started working with a more Stalin-type leader. I made a mistake. I said, who is the most famous neurosurgeon in Britain? Maybe in the Britain or Europe, and I invited him to help us with this trial. And he turned out to be rather authoritarian. And on subsequent trials, though, we've always managed to find Gandhis. There's lots of people who are more like Gandhi, who are quietly supporting you from behind. And so be careful when you're looking for leaders. Try and find collaborative leaders, people who lead from behind. And then signaling worthiness. So we invited people to take part in this global trial. This is the Crash 2 trial. This is the sort of letter we send out to people. Say, we write to people personally, inviting them to take part. We tell them the trial is supported by the World Health Organization. We say it's an international collaborative effort, that working together we can achieve much more than we can working alone. That is just so true. That with these collaborative trials, you've got to explain to people, and they know, that actually you can do your own single center trial with 20 patients, but it's actually meaningless. But if you join together and we all put our 20 patients in the trial, then we can build something that's much better than any of us could have done on our own. And then we tell them, look, we're going to publish this in the Lancet. I mean, we can't guarantee it, but we tell them that nevertheless. We're going to publish it in the Lancet, and and it's building on success. And when you write to people like that, they want to help you. They just want to help you. And we don't have authors on our trials. We call our trials don't have authors. One of the things we've realized is that you can do almost anything as long as you don't want the credit. As soon as you want to take credit for it, it all disappears. But if you don't want the credit, you can do almost anything. And so we have the Crash 2 trial collaborators, we have the team is the authorship. And at the end of the paper, we have a long list of all of the people who did anything. So if you collaborate on your trial, I was talking about the Crash 3 trial yesterday, and there were people in the audience who participated, and their names, some of their names were on the paper, not all of their names. Some people, we're limited. What we find is we're limited by the journal about how long this list can be. So we sometimes have to make choices. So if you only put one patient in the trial, we can't guarantee that your name will go on the paper. But if you put quite a lot of patients, your name can. So you build something that's that people care about, and you try and make taking part as simple as possible. Simple things are easier to do than complicated things. So you try and make the trial as simple as possible. And we try to do global trials, and so we try and overcome language barriers. So if you were a Japanese hospital and you wanted to take part in the Crash 2 trial, we would send you a Japanese version of the protocol and all of the materials for patients in Japanese, of course. We would find out when your ethics committee meets. We would prepare the documentation for your ethics committee and you would receive an envelope with the ethics committee application filled out that you only had to take out of the envelope and send it to your ethics committee. Sometimes we try and find out how many copies they require. So we try and do all the work, or all the boring parts of doing a randomized trial. We try to do that for you. So we try and do as much as we can with the import. One of the really difficult things with big global trials is getting through customs. So we have people who are really good about how to get your drugs into the country. Sometimes, we get problems where the drugs are held in customs for a long time. And we try and, respond rapidly to any questions that people have. Then you always get resistance. People always tell you, what's a problem with your trial. And what we find is that people, the same complaints come up over and over again. So what you find, you get really good at answering them. So if someone says something about the trial, then you work on an answer, and you work on it really hard because you're going to be giving that same answer maybe 200, 300 times. And you practice the answers until they work well, until until you can explain why what you want to do is worthwhile. So you simplify everything. And then you have like a marketing plan. This has changed over the years. We used to make presentations at scientific meetings, but now we don't do that anymore. We find that when people go to conferences, they're too busy focusing on other things, and so we don't talk about our trial at conferences. We have our own meetings. When we invite people to our own meetings, they're focused on this issue. The issue is the trial, and not all of the other things. Like when people go to conferences, they're so busy meeting their friends and going to, doing lots of other things. So we have our own meetings. We have national collaborators meetings. The collaborators spread the word by, word of mouth is the best way of promoting the trial. Of course, we have a trial website. We write journal articles, and we basically say to the world, look, we're doing this trial. If you can help us, we'd like to work with you. And lots of people want to help. So, if you simplify everything and invite the world to help you, they will. And then you've got to sort of, make the sale, so to speak. You've got to get people to buy into the trial. And one of the things that we realized quite early on is how to run meetings. Now, this is a meeting about the trial in Georgia, and this is the Georgian National Collaborator. She's leading the crash trial in Georgia. Now, when we started doing trials, I would go to Georgia and talk to the Georgian people, to Georgian doctors, right? Now, the interesting thing about presentations is the person who remembers most, the person who will remember this presentation most is me. The person making the presentation almost gets the most out of it. They're more likely to remember what's been said because they said it. So if we want doctors in Georgia to know about the trial, let them present the trial to you. So now we completely turned things around. I would go and talk about the trial in lots of countries. Now I never do that. I go to different countries and people talk about the trial. People present the trial to me. And of course, she's not going to want to make a mistake, so she'll read all about the trial, she'll study it, but she'll make sure that she's not making a mistake. She'll translate it into Georgian, and she'll explain it to all of her colleagues in a way that they can understand, which we couldn't do. So we completely changed the way we work. We don't talk about the trial, we ask people to talk about it to us. So this is Jorge Mejia, who's the Colombian national collaborator, talking about the trial to a group of Colombian doctors. And of course, it just works really well because he's gaining status and prestige from being the Colombian national coordinator, just as the Georgian national coordinator gets status from presenting the trial in Georgia. And so we have lots of these coordinators all over the world presenting the trial. And then we've got maintaining engagement, ensuring positive moments of truth. I'll explain what that is in a moment. Providing frequent positive reinforcement and just building it into the routine. So moments of truth, positive moments of truth. Things always go wrong in clinical trials, right? So things going wrong is sort of just, it's just normal business, right? You can't expect things not to go wrong. And they have this idea in marketing called moments of truth. So this is an example of a moment of truth. So this is so imagine this. This is, you're on Japanese Airlines, and he's the steward. I mean, he doesn't look Japanese, but he's the steward and she's the passenger. And he's just poured accidentally hot coffee on her lap, right? All on her nice skirt, hot coffee, stain it, and she's very angry. So she's standing up and she's complaining to the steward, right? Now this, in marketing terms, is called a moment of truth. And moments of truth are very interesting because they are not what you might believe. You might believe that she, because she's had coffee poured on her lap, will never want to fly Japanese Airlines ever again. But that's not the case. It depends what he does. If he responds correctly, she will never want to fly on any other airline other than Japanese Airlines ever again. But if he responds incorrectly, then she's gone. You know, she's on British Airways or ANA or whatever. And this is a moment of truth. And it's how you deal with things when they go wrong that's the really critical thing. And of course, airlines, you know what happens when something goes wrong on an airline. You know, if your television doesn't work or your seat doesn't recline, they say, "I'm terribly sorry." That's the first thing they do. They apologize. "I'm terribly sorry for that. What can we do? You know, let me take you to business class. You know, let me give you a bottle of champagne." You know, and if they manage it well, they'll never want to fly on any other airline. So when things go wrong, we were making this mistake. Things would go wrong, and I think, "Oh, that's it. There's no point working." You know, drugs have been held in customs in Nigeria for 2 months, and they're really getting angry. "Oh, we're not going to do much in Nigeria." But if you handle it well, it can be a great success. Now, we were talking about moments of truth, and then we got a very big moment of truth. This is the writing committee of the Crash 2 trial. So all of the national coordinators of all of the countries of the world come to the London School of Hygiene, and we sit around for 2 days and we draft the paper together. Now, so this was on the last day. All of this guy from Egypt and Peru and India and Colombia, Spain, everywhere. They're all there in London for this meeting. And we worked on this manuscript for 2 days, and then we said, "Right, bye-bye, everybody." And they all went off to the airport, and we said, that was exhausting. You know, looking after people is very tiring. And so we said, you know, bye-bye, off you go. And they all went off to Heathrow Airport. And then they all started coming back because this volcano erupted in Iceland. And it put out ash into the atmosphere. And the airspace around Britain was closed for a week. And nobody could fly anywhere. So they all came back. This guy, he rang the trial administrator. He's Jorge Castellano from Peru, national coordinator, and he only speaks Spanish. And he phoned up the trial administrator at 6 o'clock in the morning from Heathrow, and he only said 3 words. He said, "Jorge, Heathrow, help." And the trial administrator went out to find him, went out to meet him at Heathrow Airport, and she brought him home to her home. And we said, "Right, guys, this is it. This is our moment of truth. We've got to handle this well, otherwise it will be a disaster." So we turned our office, we turned the clinical trials unit into a travel agents, basically. The clinical trials unit became a travel agency. We had to book them on new flights. We had to go down to the embassies and extend their visas. We had to put them in hotels. It cost us £10,000. We didn't have, but we had to do it. Some of the staff took them to their homes. I think Lynn, this is Lynn, she's the data manager, and she took Jorge home to her house, and they had a Spanish dictionary on the table and eating breakfast. And so this was our moment of truth. We tried to handle it really well. And it seemed, people were very happy when they left. They knew that something bad had gone wrong. They knew it wasn't our fault. You know, the volcano is a volcano. But these people were the first to take part in the Crash 3 trial. They were, you know, we could, you know, they really started off the Crash 3 trial really well because we'd built trust with them. It's all about trust. Then we have things like newsletters. This isn't a very good example of a newsletter, but I can tell, you know, all clinical trials have newsletters, and I can tell if a trial is going to fail by looking at the newsletter. If the newsletter has a picture of the chief investigator at a conference, it's not going to do well. You know, people don't want to see the chief investigator at a conference. What people look at when they look at our newsletters, because I've watched them, they want to see a picture of themselves. And so we have newsletters with as many pictures of the collaborators as possible. And when people pick up a newsletter, they look for their name. So we have lots of names. You know, all of these are names of people who have done, you know, who have started recruitment, who have got new ethics approvals, who have done special achievements. So we really celebrate the collaborators. And then we think about the sorts of people that we're employing. So people who work with data, right? So these are data managers, and managing data is quite, you know, you have to have attention to detail. You know, you have to, you know, we want complete data, accurate data. So it's easy to choose people who are very, quite sort of, I think if I said autistic, that would be too strong, but people who are very focused on detail. But to start with in our trials, we used to employ people like that, and it didn't work. They weren't the right people, because what we found is that the people who receive the data from the collaborators are the face of the trial to the collaborators. So actually, what we want is people who can build relationships. So actually, you know, so this is Lynn, who I showed you in the previous slide. This is an example of one of her correspondences, one of her email messages to one of the collaborators to improve the accuracy of the data. Lovely to hear from you. We're freezing here in London, only 15 degrees. Thank you for sending all of these new entries. I hope you have a perfect... And Lynn was a genius at this, because all of these collaborators that she was receiving data from, she seemed to remember the names of their children, you know, what was going on in their lives. She just built relationships with them. And what we find is actually these big trials, they're all about relationships. They're all about, they're just, relationships are what make them work, really. And so having people who are good at building relationships with people was the key. And then when you get a result, you must not take the credit for it, you know. You know, we know in the office we must not take the credit for it. And so these, I mean, this is me, but we make sure that lots of other people talk about the trial results. You know, so this is the woman trial, a big trial funded by the Gates Foundation, 20,000 patients with postpartum hemorrhage. And we found that this drug that I was talking about yesterday, tranexamic acid, reduces the risk of death. And so we got collaborators from, this is Professor Chowdhury from Pakistan speaking on the BBC, Professor Bukola Fowole speaking on the television in Nigeria. Just share it all out, and it works, and everything works so much better. And that's how you can build things that are special. I feel I've got an analogy between randomized trials. I think there's no such thing as a high quality small trial, because random error is an error, and so you can't have high quality small. It has to be random error, systematic error has to be minimized, and random error has to be minimized. Systematic error is minimized by having proper allocation concealment, minimal loss to follow-up, statistical analysis plans, no data-dependent analyses. But random error is error too, and you have to minimize that by having large numbers. And to get large, and so a small trial is like, it's like a small, like a small structure, small building. But what we want to build are cathedrals, I think. We want to build something special. We're trying to build cathedrals. And that's what I spend most of my time doing now. When I started doing research, I wrote lots of papers, and nobody read them. My mother did to start with, but then even she stopped reading after a while. But so I sort of really changed my policy with research. I said, right, I'm not going to do lots of little things. I'm just going to do one thing, have one big result every 5 or 10 years even. So my university treats me like I'm a battery hen. It treats all of the academics like you're a hen, and you have to lay these eggs for the university. And these eggs are grants and papers. And you have all of these academics in their boxes laying grants and papers for the university. I'm still a battery hen, but I just lay one big egg every 10 years. I've stopped laying lots of little eggs. And that's it, really. That's all I've got to say. It's a bit of a strange lecture. But any questions about it?
Thank you very much. And any questions?
Masafumi.
I have a small question.
A small question.
You talked, you asked people in the country to make presentation by themselves. But people could sometimes wrong or bad presentation. So did you help them to make good presentation?
Generally they don't. We have a protocol, and when people are required to present, when they're presenting it, they read it very carefully. They read it much more carefully than if you're telling them about it. Because they think, right, I'm going to have to present this trial. I'm going to read. And if of course they said something that was, if they made a mistake, we'd say, well, actually, no, that's not quite right, But we would explain what we meant, We'd say, well, maybe we didn't make this very clear in the protocol, but what we mean by this is this. But they learn much more from presenting it to you than from you than from listening to you present to them. Professor.
Yes. So the most important thing, the money.
The money.
So
Okay, so unfortunately, it's getting more expensive to do the same thing. So the first crash trial cost about £1 million. Now, so we randomized 10,000 patients for £1 million. I think £1 million is, I don't know, someone's going to, it's something okuen, but I'm not sure how many okuen it is. Ni okuen. It's about, yeah, tabun ni okuen.
It depends on the exchange rate.
Exchange rate.
It's getting cheaper in terms of pound these days, I think.
Well, no, the weak pound is a problem for our trials because actually everything we have to pay for in different countries is more expensive.
So don't you make any more specific control about the protocol? According to your presentations, you allow the local government authority to present, right?
Yeah.
But when you get all data from all of the local authority, then maybe to, as you said, you want to minimize stochastic factor, and also that you want to minimize samples.
Yeah. So
How do you?
all of these sites are following one protocol and they're collecting the identical data in the same way. And we don't ask them to collect a lot of data. So rather than randomizing 20 patients and having 20 pages of an outcome measure, we would prefer to randomize 20,000 patients and have a single side of outcome measure. People collect, in general, far too much data. And so you have to have the courage to just collect a small amount of data, but the data that is needed to answer your question. So in our trauma trials, it's very easy because the outcome that matters is very easy to measure, and it's death. So, and people never get it wrong. I mean, we go to sites and we check and we look at the notes and we look at what's on the outcome form, and it's very accurate.
So maybe your endpoint is just differentiate this or not. That's only the endpoint.
No, we have death and adverse effects, heart attack, stroke, pulmonary embolism, and operations, but you can get it on a single side of A4. And even things like disability. But simple questions on disability. Can you wash yourself? Can you feed yourself? Can you go to the shops? And these can be very simple outcome measures, but you collect them on lots of patients. But yeah.
Why did you go for international collaboration? I mean, was that a primary outcome? I mean, you wrote the protocol, you wanted to look at countries of different outcome, different management, or was it difficult to have 10,000 patients from UK only? Because when you go for multiple centers, the data will become heterogeneous.
We go multi-center because you can recruit faster because there are more patients. The thing about the world is there's no shortage of sick people in the world, right? And so, head injuries, internationally, like the rate of head injuries in, say, India, Pakistan, China is much higher than it would be in Japan or the UK. So going to countries where the problem is very common makes a lot of sense. And about heterogeneity, it's interesting that in all of the trials we've done so far, we find no heterogeneity by country. So and it's the heterogeneity in the treatment effect. So, there is heterogeneity in the death rates. The risk of dying from trauma in Nigeria is much higher than the risk of dying from trauma in the UK. But the effect of the treatment on mortality in Nigeria is exactly the same as it is in the UK. that, when we do analysis stratified by country, everything is in a line. They're very nice in a way because these big trials are like individual patient data meta-analysis. They're like prospective individual patient data meta-analyses of like 400 trials with no missing data. So we can analyze the trial as if it was a meta-analysis, and each center was a small trial, and they're all in the line, and there's no significant heterogeneity.
That was not the case for class 3. Yesterday you presented that the odds ratio was different for the high-income countries.
It wasn't. There was no statistically significant heterogeneity. The treatment effect was slightly bigger in high-income countries than low and middle-income countries, but it was still in the same direction, and there was no significant heterogeneity. I think the relative risk was something like, for high-income countries it was like 0.78, and for low and middle-income countries it was 0.82 or something like that. 1.0. Is that right? You've got a very good memory, but let's have a look. So this is the treatment effect in high-income countries, 0.72, and this is the treatment effect in low and middle-income countries, 0.83. Obviously, they're both statistically significant. Well, I used that term. I said yesterday we should never use that term. Never mind. Strike that off the record. It's slightly more imprecise in the high-income country because there's fewer events. That's why we go to low and middle-income countries, because there's lots of events. And but these two results, this is low and middle-income, this is high-income. They're not different from each other.
I think you had another slide.
You mean about the severe head injury?
Oh yeah, I did.
Because there was a difference.
There was actually this one. Yeah, in fact, these two are not statistically significantly heterogeneous either. But this was a sort of, I think we have to, even though there was no clear evidence of heterogeneity, you can still think, well, maybe there is heterogeneity. Yeah.
We have to think about the background of logistics about ambulance. When you mean high-income country, if something happens, we just call and to the ambulance come.
Yeah.
They come, but in low-income countries.
The other thing about low-income.
Anyway, this trial itself is just comparison of the mortality rate and also the treatment only.
Yeah, the thing about this is that you can, even, let me go to that last one at the end. This one. The death rates are different, right? So, take extracranial bleeding. 10% of patients die, 20% of patients die. So the death rate can differ largely, but the effect of the treatment effect is remarkably homogeneous. And I think that's because it's about the treatment's working at the level of biology, and actually the difference between a poor person bleeding in Africa, as far as the drug is concerned, is the same as a wealthy person bleeding in England, because it's about the interaction of the drug and the target, and actually how wealthy the patient is or where they are doesn't really come into it. So the treatment effect is remarkably homogeneous, even though
Actually, if we think about the emergency department in high-income country, low-income country, maybe ambulance doctor some doctors are very good at using catecholamine or something, or some other cardiovascular drugs.
Maybe. The other thing about low and middle income countries is that
I'm not sure in the lower income countries how they use this kind of drugs. But it depends. I mean, in a higher income country, although they have a lot of cardiovascular modulating drug, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that they are good at to handle this kind of drug.
Yes. I find that when people think about low and middle income countries, they think they're homogeneously low and middle income, but they're not. They're actually, it's much more varied than that. That you can have a country that's poor on average, but there are some really excellent places all over the place. And actually, the doctors in low and middle income countries, I generally find, are better at evidence-based medicine than they are in high income countries because they need to be. Right? They can only afford safe and effective treatments, and so they've got a real need to identify what's worth paying for and what's not. In UK hospitals, if you go into the emergency department, they're crowded with machines, and they don't do anything. There's technology everywhere that industries have forced in there. I'm sure it'll be the same in Japan. But these machines, there's no evidence, in most cases, there's no evidence that they improve outcome. So they look very modern. But when I go to a hospital in Peru or something like that, there's not much there. There's not much there. But what is there is what they need. That's what I find.
So, what is the motivation to get collaboration with international relationship? So, what is motivated?
What motivates me to get international? Well, first there's the idea of doing something that's big. I think everybody goes through this realization that you can do lots of things, you can do lots of small things, but they don't really make any difference. And that actually, if you could put all of your effort into a fewer things that really did make a difference, it would just be a better use of your time. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that I just quite like people. And it's just nice, it's just really good fun. The big trials are actually much more of a social challenge. I'm not as good as it. There are people, that's the other thing I'm not as good at it as some of the other people. So I work with people who are much better at it than me. Even though I do like people, I'm still a little bit introverted, like lots of academics. I can get really sort of caught up with an idea. And, I can sort of not notice people and, I mean, you see them in universities all the time, walking around the corridors, good morning, Professor. I can be a bit like that, a bit sort of in my head. Whereas the people I work with are much better at working with people.
Very hard and difficult and tough to get collaboration with people in other countries. So
no, that's not true. It's absolutely not true. I find it's completely the opposite. This is how I see it, right? There's a big world out there, right? And then and lots of doctors who feel excluded from the world of research, right? They see thousands and thousands and thousands of patients, but they can't contribute to research to improve outcome for those patients one bit, right? They're completely excluded from the world of research. And you say, actually, here we are, come on, you're welcome. And actually, not only are you going to participate in the world of research, but you're going to do research that's world class as well. Honestly, you can't stop them. You can't stop them. There are more people who want to work with you than you could ever imagine. And as soon as you realize that, you say, well, just open door. Masafui.
My question is similar. So I think it's very awesome. You could move so many people from so many countries. I think it's a key, very key of your success during these huge trials. So I want to know what's the most important issue to move people. Actually, I'm managing a Math Center for Self-Study, and I'm very struggling to move people. So I want to know what you about.
So you're struggling to recruit patients. So first you have to simplify things, I think, right? So you can't do big things that are complicated. So you have to really simplify things. You have to make difficult choices. Because when you start off doing research, you say, I want to collect all of these papers. Oh, that would be interesting if we collected data on that. And what about that? And data collection instrument gets very long. That's not going to work. If you really simplify things, and it's about this marketing thing that I was telling you. You've got to simplify things. You've got to have, you've got to. Well, all of it, you've got to have what are the values, brand values of doing this? You've got to take yourself out of it, People with these trials, we're not asking them, I'm not asking them to help me, I'm asking us to do something together. I mean, they do help me, of course, the university is happy that we do these big trials, but we say that the idea is that we're trying to do something together, and it helps them as well. So, I mean, the first trial, the first big trial we did, the Crash 1 trial, we like to name the trials by the collaborative group, but sometimes when it's indexed in PubMed, PubMed likes to put names to it. So my name is, I know, something like around the 300th name, and in fact, because we listed the names on the paper alphabetically, and so Miguel Arango is the first author. He was lucky to have A as a surname. So the first author is Miguel Arango, and the second author is somebody Arturo or something like that. And because I'm Roberts, I'm down at, But I don't know. There's too much. There's too much you have to say to answer your question, really.
My question is, when you started your first trial, Crash 1, so how did you find your mentor to conduct large international trial? Because you told us that no textbook told us how to conduct large trial, so in reality.
Yeah. So what I told you that we were we copied the cardiologists. And so there's a guy called Richard Peto and Rory Collins. There are two people, Richard Peto, Rory Collins. They work at the University of Oxford. So I said, right, we want to do a randomized trial, a big randomized trial in head injury, like you've done in cardiovascular disease. And we asked if they could help, and they did. They had learned from trial and error over a period of over many years, and then we didn't have to invent it all again. we actually just copied them, right? And we said, look, we looked at their protocols and their materials, and we looked at what they were doing, and we copied them. And this is the really nice thing about human progress, isn't it? That you can just copy people, you know? And we put all of our protocols on the web, and people copy them. And I see head injury trials with the outcome form that I designed that have nothing to do with me in different countries. And I think, oh, great, look at that. They've copied me. But that's the good thing, you know? So, you know, we can progress much more quickly by not, you know, starting from the very beginning. But we can see this is part of our culture, you know? It's part of our culture. We don't need to learn. We don't need to start as if there was no culture there. We just, you know, this is part of our scientific culture. I mean, you know, we all use randomization if we can now. You know, that was invented by somebody. It was a good invention, brilliant invention. So we all copy it now, you know, and that's fantastic. That speeds up the pace of progress. What I think we're not doing is that we're not doing trials big enough. I think I would love to see a day where we get a question on a Monday and we get the answer on a Friday, because we've randomized, in that week, we've randomized 50,000 patients. You know, that's what I'd like to see. And I think it's a future that should be possible, you know, because now we're so much connected, the internet, you know, information's flowing everywhere really quickly. You know, it should be possible to do really big trials. You're doing a trial of mobile phone-based cognitive behavioral therapy for university students. You know, there's no reason why that should be bounded. You know, if you could translate things into different languages, you could go big quite quickly, couldn't you? So you could imagine how you could do quite big trials of that sort of intervention. Well, I can. I mean, can you? Do you think it would be possible to do much bigger trials of an intervention like that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
I think.
Yeah, because, you know, you can deliver a signal to, you know, lots of places in the world.
I think talk about how to, when you show us the moment of truth, that you tell us how to keep your team members. I just wonder, because the question 112 is also a live that still clinical trials. Before that, how did you gather your team members? What will you tell us some practical ways?
Well, I can tell you the truth, but I can't tell you. But basically, I told you that I really got burnt out. I was trying really hard to do everything myself. And actually, I'm glad you asked that question, because it's a lesson that I learned that I didn't tell you. What I thought is that I was essential. I thought that I was really essential to the success of the trial. And until I got really exhausted, and then I said, I hired someone called Halima, and I said, Halima, here's the protocol, you're in charge. And I went on my yoga holiday, right? And I thought, well, that's it. You know, I've given it over to Halima, it's all going to go down. It just kept on getting better and better. She was much better at doing it than I was. And I realized that actually, that's another mistake we make. We make a mistake of thinking we're good at all of the things. But we're not. I'm very good, I think. I'm very good at knowing what should be done. I'm much less good at doing it. So if I say this should be done and get the money, there's other people who know how to do it much better than me. At the back.
I'm curious how you were able to
I mean, I was, I suppose the first crash trial, I was in my early 30s, and so I had done some research. I'd done enough, you know, I worked a lot on injury prevention. I'd done lots of small things. I mean, all of these small things, they're not completely worthless. I'm not saying they're worthless. One of the things, you know, writing papers, sometimes you've just got to learn how to write to start with. So it's not wasteful activity, but what's the question? How did I manage to get the money?
Well, it's a nice idea to be able to lay one golden egg every 10 years.
Yeah.
But in academia, is that really possible early in your career?
Well, increasingly, it is possible. Our university has changed. It used to kind of weigh people's CV. It used to put the CV on a scales and see how heavy it was. But actually, universities are moving away from that. In the UK, now, you know, you have to say, every 5 years, the university is assessed by the government to see how good a university it is. And they only ask academics to give their 3 best papers in the last, you know, 5 years. And so universities are realizing that its quality is more important than, well, in terms of numbers of papers, the quality is more important than the quantity. So if you can do less but better quality, that works. I don't know what it's like in Japan, but I know in the UK that's the way things are heading.
So the crush 3, the treatment is tranexamic acid, right? And crush 2 was a stroke.
Crash 2 is bleeding, extracranial hemorrhage.
Are we looking for crash 4?
I'm thinking about crash 4. This is the most difficult time. This is actually one time in between trials I find very anxious. In between laying big eggs is very difficult because you've got to get pregnant with the egg. So you've got to know what to do, and I find that the hardest thing. And
But now you have the collaboration, you have the confidence, you have everything, so it should be easy.
No, in fact, the hardest thing is the question. I think if you get a good question, then everybody will help you. But if it's not a good question, they won't help you. You know, there are some questions that people can see are better than others. You know, they thought, well, that's a question. I need to answer that. And you can tell when you've got them because, you know, you think, oh, maybe that, but it doesn't. But when you get, I have to get a very big emotion for something. And then unless it grasps me emotionally, I can't do it. Because it's a bit like getting married because, well, you know, you should be married for more than 10 years ideally, but you know, it's a long-term relationship, you know, so you've got to actually, you've got to care about it for enough, you know, for 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years. That's what I find. Getting a good question is the hard thing. I don't think there are any more questions. Thank you.
Okay, then thank you very much. Thank you.